One thing that I will always find to be deeply disturbing is food selling itself. Whenever I pass a chip shop and I see a sign outside with an ecstatic cartoon fish advertising the cost of its flesh, or a pig hawking pork lumps from its flank in the vicinity of a butcher's, the existential dread just takes me over. Wholesale. Stop it. Have some self-respect, creatures of land and sea. It's just weird. It is not, however, just restricted to those beasts. Berries perpetually wish to merge their bodies into a sugary syrup for Ribena, and potatoes willingly offer their dried up husks to be crisps in advertising. It's like a death cult with food. And the stars of today's game, the California Raisins, well, they've upped the ante even more because they sing their way into human mouth oblivion, and sing with gusto at that. Such great talent too, singing soul hits like Heard It on the Grapevine by Marvin Gaye, but with such a lowly opinion of themselves that they wish to end up as a meandering turd in a British river. Sad times. And so the California Raisins, stars of two separate video games. What can I tell you about them then? What, besides that they are musically refined dried fruit? Well, they were part of a sales drive by Sunmaid in 1986 and the California Raisin Advisory Board. Advertising company Foot, Cone and Belding were toying with different ideas when one of the writers said, "Well, we've tried everything, but dancing raisin singing, I heard it through the grapevine." And so they went with that, recruiting claymation animators Vinton Studios to create the commercial. Vocals in the advert were provided by Buddy Miles, a collaborator with Carlos Santana and Jimi Hendrix. And you know what? It worked, big time. Look at this sales spike in American raisin sales in 1986 and 1987. Wowza, wowza. Raisin, raisin, they're good for your trousers. The little animated fellas, AC, Bebop, Stretch and Red, became incredibly popular with several more commercials commissioned, and then a branching out into other media and a ton of merchandise. Yes, singing advert raisins were super popular, and you could adorn yourself with a t-shirt of them. It was a different time. They also had toys, comics, a series of albums and VHS special videos. You've eaten the cast, now see them sing. The advertising even crossed the pond onto UK screens in the late 80s, so we weren't oblivious to the charms of nature's sweets crooning at us. Capitalising on this popularity were two separate video game companies, Box Office Software and Capcom. Box Office Software released the California Raisins and the Cereal Factory in the US for the Apple II, the Commodore 64 and the IBM PC in 1988. It was a truly torrid dour platformer with confusing mechanics and a short runtime, rightly poorly received and a critical and commercial failure. So rather than dwell on that one, let's have a look at the NES title instead. Capcom had planned to release California Raisins, the Grape Escape, in 1990, but the American public were a fickle bunch and they were no longer interested in these purple scrotum resemblers at this point. So much so that there was a downward direction to the raisin cell graph I showed you earlier on. This led Capcom to abandon the project, even though the game was in the bag and ready to go. Several magazines had covered it during production, but it was never to be played by the consumer. A prototype cartridge was located in 2003 in Florida, was sold shortly after for $1,000, and then the ROM was released onto the internet later that year. It was programmed in the US by Radiance Software, who I believe were credited as being the brains trust behind such classics as the Great Waldo Search on the Mega Drive, Super Nintendo and NES, and the terrible TurboGrafx version of Darkwing Duck. The storyline for this game has this unnamed raisin in green sunglasses sent out by these judges who are under the impression, but not overly convincingly so, that the Californian Raisins have been kidnapped, and their music has been kidnapped too? How does that work? Anyway, it is possibly the Wild Bunch, who are a rival band, that has taken them to the top of a grapevine, as these rather confused-looking fibrous Supreme Court crusties are explaining. I demand a bit of clarification, really, before I go on this wild grape chase, you goons. You must battle through 4 levels which can be tackled in any order before you're allowed to tackle the last level, which is the cloud-scattered heights of the top of the grapevine. Ooh, it's just like that they're the Mega Man. And of course, by who else but the makers of this, Capcom. Thanks, Capcom. In a disturbing development, 2 of the 4 locations are involved in the butchering of your people. The factory and the juicery are essentially akin to a pig visiting an abattoir. But then the villains of this piece are also fruit-based, so they're a bit messed up to be hanging out in such horrendous locales. Not only is that disturbing though, but it's made far more unsettling by the fact that your shade-wearing current has, as his attack, taken to getting rid of his opponents by shooting lumps of his own flesh or shooting his own juice out of his flank. This is an advert game as directed by David Cronenberg. As you can witness with your very own eyes, it's a traditional NES platformer. You move around a platformy maze, picking up power-ups and trying to find the boss character and grasp the golden note that he will leave once you've put him down with your flesh lumps. Collecting the golden note brings you 1 quarter closer to an encounter with your nemesis. Then you'll be able to free your musical heroes and be on your sweet way home, which probably is a small red box in a children's lunch bag. You'll be making the ultimate sacrifice for the greater raisin good. So how does the Grape Escape play? Well, I've played worse. And yes, the damning with the faint praise brush is fully in operation here. Graphically, it looks fine. A washed out NES palette is being utilised, as you can see, and it's being used on various well-drawn enemy sprites that inhabit rather generic backdrops that make up the game's levels. You do get a NES rendition of the Marvin Gaye classic Heard It on the Grapevine at the start of the game, and some rather generic game music after that. Gameplay? Well, it's fine. The response time between pressing the jump and the little fruit can be a little bit slovenly, I suppose, which does make some of the leaps particularly gripe-inducing when you're gripping onto a rope or a climbable pole. It makes you suffer as you plummet to your death. The levels aren't particularly labyrinthine, and it's positively brisk in its length, but the challenge is stretched out by having quite a few insta-death moments during the duration of the game. Overall, it's not anything that I think we really feel that we should have missed out on, despite it not appearing for a couple of decades after. It's fine, but when Capcom were the software house behind such incredible NES platformers like the Mega Man series, Bionic Commando and DuckTales, I think we can give this one a miss, can't we? The California Raisins, the Grape Escape, got a fair amount of coverage before its release, but not much in the way of reviews, so I can't really give you a lot there. What I will give you is puns. It's currently not the worst thing I've played to date. It could do with raising its game, but at least it's sun-dried. As in, tried. Yeah, enough of that. Let's talk about the next episode and a change in format, pace, and indeed mood, as we look at the game adaptation of a book, James Herbert's horror classic novel, The Rats. Yeah, end it like we started. Existential dread. Like, subscribe. Okay, thanks, bye.